Welcome to the Steroids Podcast with your host, Dan the Bodybuilder from Thailand. Boom! Boom! Let's get started here. The Steroids Podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Guide to Roids, 109-page ebook by Dan the Bodybuilder from Thailand. Now, for the first time in bodybuilding history, you have someone with no corporate interests and no obligation to please anyone, not walking on eggshells to not offend. Ultimate Guide to Roids gives you the information, the whole truth, not a full truth and a half truth, full truth. Ultimate Guide to Roids gives you the keys to the Lamborghini, gives you the information, and lets you decide what to do with it. It's a crime this information has been suppressed this long. Now let's get on with the podcast.
Okay, next question is from Tyler. Hey Dan, longtime listener, short-time steroid user. I have a few questions for you about my cycle. I'm planning on running, just wondering on your input. At the moment, I have a bunch of testosterone, Deca, and Arimidex. Just wondering on what's the best dosage you recommend for max gains and would like to keep my dick working. I'm down to pay for a phone consultation if you want to talk to me that way. Thanks, bro. Yeah, we can do a phone consultation, Tyler. I do the phone consultations, $60 for the hour. You can send me an email, steroidspodcast@gmail.com, and we can set up a time to do the phone call on WhatsApp. That's where I do the phone call consultations. But as far as test Deca, what is the best dosage? And you for max gains and would like to keep your dick working? Okay, well, you're going to have to know whether or not Deca gives you high prolactin symptoms or not, because if that is the case, the Arimidex won't be effective in solving dick issues. It'll have to be Calbergoline or Pramipexole, a dopamine agonist, to balance out the prolactin. But as far as the testosterone and the Deca and what are good dosages, a good dosage of testosterone for bodybuilding is 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams per week. 750 milligrams per week can also do it, okay? That can be like a minimum dosage for like getting fullness and stuff, okay? You're going to hear different numbers from different people, okay? And, you know, some of them might say like that's outrageous or something what I just said, but I'm just telling you the God honest truth about the dosages that work for bodybuilding. And if anyone takes these dosages, then they will know that what I'm saying is not monkeys flying out of my butt, okay? That this is real. So if I was going to, for a bodybuilder, I wouldn't take less than 750 milligrams of testosterone. I just wouldn't. Because the testosterone is dose dependent, how big and strong you get. Every milliliter you increase it. It's dose dependent, how much muscle you put on. So that's a major factor. Taking high testosterone, if you want to get big muscles, strong, and you want to gain strength, being on high testosterone for a long time and saying to yourself, I like this. I like being on high testosterone. This creates what you're looking for as far as freaky size and strength. The Deca, somewhere between 400 to 800 milligrams per week. That's also going to be, you don't want to take a lot of Calbergoline. If you're taking Calbergoline, you want to keep the dose low. So if you can take 0.25 milligrams twice per week or 0.5 milligrams twice per week, I'd say that's okay. But you don't want to take high doses of Caber ever. So if your Trenbolone or your Deca is requiring you to do that to prevent gyno, etc., then it's good to lower the dosage, because just having these things in makes a difference. Just even if they are at low dosages, Deca or Trenbolone 19 Nors, just having them in the stack makes a difference, even if it's only 200 milligrams a week. So as like saying, like, what is the lowest effective dosage of Deca? 200 milligrams per week. What is a good dose of Deca to run with testosterone to get big muscle and strength gains, 400 to 800 milligrams per week. So like a cycle that was like 1,000 milligrams of test, 600 milligrams of Deca, or 1,500 milligrams of test and 600 to 800 milligrams of Deca is going to facilitate enormous amounts of strength and size coming onto your body. If you make your body weight go up, and while you're doing that, you're taking this cycle, and then while you're doing that, you're in the gym and your lifts are going up, the amount of weight that you can do on the same lift is going up, or the amount of reps that you can do with a certain weight is going up, or the amount of sets that you can handle with a certain weight is going up. If those factors are happening, you will be gaining major muscle tissue. All right, next question. Daniel asks, hey mate, question for the podcast. Can you please explain the liver's role with glucose homeostasis? What is glycogenesis and gluconeogenesis? Does this have anything to do with insulin sensitivity? Okay, so gluconeogenesis is when your liver is creating glucose. So it does that all the time pretty much, unless you're drinking vinegar or taking metformin or taking a GLP-1 agonist like semaglutide. Otherwise, yeah, your liver is producing glucose. It's doing it out of protein, out of some waste products like lactate. So like out of amino acids, a little bit out of fats, and then some other miscellaneous items. The liver goes through a process because the liver is a metabolic structure, and there's a lot of chemical reactions going on in the liver. So it's able to transform some of these compounds. You know, we can just say primarily amino acids, proteins. Some of the protein you eat gets converted into glucose. And that is what gluconeogenesis, the liver is doing that. And that could be one reason. If somebody's liver is doing a ton of gluconeogenesis, then that could be a reason that was making it so it was hard for them to lose fat. Because if you've got a ton of gluconeogenesis going, then it's going to be hard for your insulin levels to come down because they're going to have to be up to balance that increased blood sugar. So that's one of the ways that, for example, taking 500 milligrams of metformin before you go to sleep helps a person stay leaner. I mean, it definitely does. It stops gluconeogenesis when you sleep. And while you sleep, that is the time when the body is most relying on burning body fat for energy. And if you have the glucose system shut off during that time and you're fasting, you're eating nothing while you sleep, the body fat is going to be used as an energy source. And so metformin is just a good example. And that protocol of just taking 500 milligrams metformin before you go to bed, it has a positive body recomposition effect. Okay, and then the other one was glycogenolysis. So glycogenolysis also happens in the liver, but it also happens in the muscles. That is when the sugars are they're formed into like a cluster. The sugars are formed into a cluster, and they're stored for quick, immediate future use. Either stored in the liver glycogen, and that's for balancing blood sugar. When you haven't eaten and the blood sugar drops, then the liver will start releasing liver glycogen back into the bloodstream, which was converted carbohydrates into a storage state. And then when it gets released back into the bloodstream, it's being converted back into the glucose state, the free glucose state. And then the cells use the glucose to make ATP, which is the energy source that the cells run on. But the glycogenolysis also happens in the muscle. So whenever you eat an amount of carbohydrates and your glucose goes higher than what is needed, that's when the liver and the muscles start doing glycogenolysis and creating glycogen. So after a workout, these are very sensitive times for muscle cell insulin sensitivity, getting the carbohydrates into the muscle cells where they can then be stored as glycogen. So as far as like the intra-workout drink and the post-workout meal, and I mean even the pre-workout meal, like it is so underrated how powerful the nutrition around the workout is. it is a major myth that comes from natural bodybuilding that, it doesn't matter what you do around your workout. What the hell is an anabolic window? When you're on PEDs, the anabolic window is so real and is a major factor in your gains. It can be, if the anabolic window is used right, like for example, the intra-workout drink, it can be like taking steroids. It can be like taking more steroids because of how it upregulates all the anabolic things that are happening in your body. So like what I mean is that like if you're on 1,000 milligrams of test and 600 milligrams of Deca or something, and you start doing the intra-workout drink with the dextrose, it can have the equivalent effect of like adding 50 milligrams of Anadrol to your cycle. So it's important. All right, next question. Jason asks, hey, Dan, wanted to get your thoughts on a cycle. I'm 53 years old, 5'8", 235 pounds. Been on enough gear since early 90s, mostly off the last 10 to 15 years. Been running tests 200 to 600 milligrams, but want to put on some size. That's a really good dose for guys that have been bodybuilding, because he said he's been taking steroids since the early 90s. And so that's the thing, is that you've got to have, because this is an extreme sport, there's got to be some cycling of intensity with this. If you just completely base your ego around, I'm on this stuff and this is what I look like when I'm on this stuff, it's not going to be a very long time. So he's, for the last 10 to 15 years, not been blasting so hard, but it's been about 30 years. So, for about half the time, he's not been blasting so hard, but he's mostly been on 200 to 600 milligrams of testosterone. And I would say that is the perfect dose for somebody who's looking to cool it down a bit and not be going super hardcore, but still keep a ton of muscle mass, okay? And be ready, if you do go on a cycle again, to just blow back up in 3 weeks to 3 months. And so he says that he's 5'8", 235, and, been using 200 to 600 milligrams of gear. So he's a pretty big guy from having used gear a lot for a long time. And now he's been able to maintain a pretty decent size on that moderate testosterone dose. But let me tell you that it's not going to come with the cosmetic effects of being on cycle and stuff. Like a lot of people think, oh, well, am I going to be able to, after I get a certain amount of gain, am I going to be able to look the same way that I did on steroids when I'm not on steroids? And the answer is absolutely not, because having those steroids in your blood makes you look a certain way. So even if you do keep the muscle mass afterwards, you will not look the way that you looked when you were taking the steroids and had them in your blood. So for like this guy, for example, he still is heavy, he's still big, but he's not on as much stuff anymore. So I mean, I can see I don't have a picture of him, right? But I can guess in my head, what's going on looks a little softer, but still looks big. This looks very dense, does not have the angular muscle separation, like the traps completely sticking out of the clavicle like it's a different entity, and the shoulders looking like round bowling balls, and, there being a tiered staircase look. That's not how it is when you go on moderate testosterone, 200 to 600 milligrams per week. That is not the cosmetic effect that those doses cause. But if you add creatine to the testosterone, you can approximate it a little bit more. Actually, doing testosterone and creatine together, it's kind of funny, but I think there's definitely some application there for you guys that are on the testosterone, nothing else, but looking to add a little more punch to it. Maybe if you're like this guy, and you're not doing hard cycles for the last 10 to 15 years, but it looks like he's getting ready to run another one. So I just wanted to talk about that, the kind of TRT thing, or because I know that there's guys who are wondering about, okay, I've been using gear for a long time. Well, how do I reduce? How do I reduce? And so I wanted to discuss that with the 200 to 600 milligram thing. Okay, so he's getting back on, though. He says he wants to put on some size. and run 1,000 milligrams testcypionate for 10 weeks with 100 milligrams Anadrol daily for the first 7 weeks and 50 milligrams Winstrol daily for the last 7 weeks, with 4 weeks of overlap on both Anadrol and Winstrol. Okay, so it depends on how resilient you are to orals, because that is 14 weeks on orals, 100 milligrams of Anadrol, 50 milligrams of Winstrol, and they are separated, but you do have 4 weeks in the middle where you're using both. That's a long time to use orals. So some of the side effects of toxicity from orals is like feeling very tired and feeling like caffeine does nothing for you. And so if somebody has toxicity and they're like, okay, I'm like really tired, like I don't have energy to get up off the couch, and I certainly don't feel like going to the gym and training, like, you know, what the hell? And then they drink caffeine to be like, well, let me fix this by drinking caffeine. The caffeine really won't do anything. It won't give you energy if you have oral steroid toxicity. So that's kind of what it feels like. And then there can be other symptoms too, like bloodshot eyes chronically, not for one day, but for a week straight. Stuff. And there can be various symptoms, but you know, the real one that makes you know, like, am I getting kind of toxic on these orals is the energy thing. Because it's a distinct feeling where the caffeine doesn't do anything to help it get better. So TUDCA and NAC are definitely effective substances for running orals and reducing toxicity, but injections of glutathione are stronger. And as far as like a supplement or something that has detox properties that someone can take, I personally have never found anything that can even come close to glutathione injections. They have incredibly potent detox activity. And NAC and TUDCA, while beneficial, just aren't in the same league as glutathione injections. So let's get on with your cycle. So you also say that you're going to be running clenbuterol 40 micrograms and yohimbine 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and doing fasted cardio. Can you think of anything to add or take away? And before you say it, I don't have a pharma growth connection, and my IGF-1 is from the doctor. Okay. Okay, yeah. So generic growth hormone is fine. Yeah, I'm definitely big on pharma growth hormone, and I mean that's what the pros are using, you know, and so that's the one that gives the right effects. You know, when you use generic growth hormone, usually there's more water retention. Usually there's not as much fat loss. There can be some weird side effects like growth hormone-induced gyno or long-term growth hormone-induced sexual dysfunction. So there can be some weird side effects with generic growth hormone. But it works. It makes a person bigger and stronger. It does. So you were thinking, is there anything that I would take away or add? Wish somebody was telling it like you back in the 90s. Keep it up. Okay, thanks, Jason. So I would think about taking a break from the orals in the middle. Even a 2-week break would benefit you and help you feel better, keep a high energy and everything during the cycle. Like I said, some guys can really just handle shit. This is not a fair game where this sport is not a fair thing where everybody gets the same side effects when they take something. One guy can take something and be fine, and another guy can take something and be fucked up. It can really hurt one guy and be fine with another guy. Make one guy feel like shit, make another guy feel great. Taking the same stuff. So with the orals, I would say take a break in the middle. If you're running them 14 weeks, like how about do 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 6 weeks on? That's what I would recommend. Usually when guys are talking to me about how to run the orals, usually I'll say something like 6 weeks on, 4 weeks off, 6 weeks on, because it takes about 4 weeks for your blood work to return to normal after using orals. And then you stop using orals and you're like, okay, well, I want my blood work to return to normal. How long does that typically take? It typically takes 4 to 5 weeks. So if you're going to do a long cycle of orals, it can be good. Like 6 weeks is a nice boost, a nice amount of time. Use the orals, break your plateaus, get stronger. And then, training, doing volume work with that strength that you gained after you stop using the orals, still in the injectables. But 6 weeks on, 4 weeks off, 6 weeks on with the orals. I would say I would recommend that, I wouldn't recommend it, okay, because I don't recommend anything on this podcast, okay? But I would say that that's a good idea. All right, Jared has a comment. I've listened to so much of your podcast. It's amazing, but I've never been so inspired by any podcast ever as much as your podcast titled Grab the Bull by the Horns. I'm a very motivated guy and have achieved a lot, but I feel inspired to do more now, to run farther, to jump higher, to reach further. Thanks for putting that out there. Yeah, I do have a second podcast called Grab the Bull by the Horns, and it's not about steroids. It's more just about my story and how I think about things. It's about my life, my story, how I think about things. And so I always put a link to that in the description of the podcast page. So if you look in the description of the podcast, this podcast, the Steroids podcast, there's going to be a link to the Grab the Bull podcast if you want to listen to that there. All right. Chase asks, I love what Trenbolone Acetate does for my sex drive. I'm about to take my woman on a week-long cruise and want to maintain my sexual Trenace gains. How much Trenanthate should I take before the vacation to keep my levels high? Well, it's only a week. So Tren's pretty much out of your system about 3 to 4 days after the last shot you took. So for the most part, you're actually going to feel it while you're on the cruise. But, if how much, let me see how much Trenbolone you're on. Well, you didn't say how much Tren you're on, okay? So it's going to be hard for me to say how much would need to be used to keep the effects going for a week-long cruise. But something like 300 milligrams, I mean, you've got the acetate in there, and anthate peaks in 24 hours after the shot. So if you had your acetate going, you took a 300 milligram shot of an anthate the day you left or something like that, it would be up with the levels elevated 24 hours later, and it would stay elevated for about like 5 days and then start running off. But it wouldn't be out of your system for about 2 weeks after taking that shot. So that would work. That would be enough Trenanthate to maintain your Trenace sexual gains, as you put it. All right, Mark asks, what are the cosmetic effects of Deca? This is a really good question. A lot of people don't ever say the word cosmetic effects and Deca together, but actually people look really freaking good on Deca. Deca, the cosmetic effects are very similar to Anadrol. It blows you up from the inside out, and it absolutely has an effect where the person just looks more 3D and dense and like a flying Boeing 747 with their freaking round shoulders and shit. Deca helps people pile on mass and strength. And it's one of the major hormones throughout this whole time since the 1940s until now that has put on mass and built big ass bodybuilders, okay? Big ass bodybuilders use a lot of Deca. It's something that's in the stack regularly. But amateurs, it's not popular. It's not popular on the internet, and it's not popular in gyms. Deca is not, at this point in time, a popular hormone at all, really. But it's not like it makes you look like shit or something, or like puts 1 inch of water in between your skin from head to toe or something. It doesn't do any of that. if you're relatively lean and you start taking Deca, your muscles will swell up and they'll look really big and full and swole, like from the inside out. And that's kind of what like high testosterone does too. That's kind of what high testosterone does. But it's more like Anadrol, yeah, because the Deca is not a natural hormone, and the way that your shoulders and shit look on Deca is not natural. The way that your traps look is not natural. With testosterone, in order to get that look where testosterone is giving you an unnatural look, the dose has to go real high, like probably around like 1,500 milligrams per week is the dose where testosterone is affecting someone more like a drug rather than a natural hormone. And you start seeing effects on their body like, what the hell is that? Other than just being like, you're big. So yeah, those are the cosmetic effects of Deca. I think Deca is a super compound for getting big. Of course, people talk about like toxicity a lot, you know. There's a lot of like science, you know, that is available because this is one of the most used hormones ever. It's been used in tons of different populations, tons of different classes of patients. And so there's a lot of medically, you know, not like for steroid bodybuilding use, but medically, Deca has been used a lot. So there's a lot of information on this and a lot of studies and stuff on it. So while there is like evidence that the chemical Deca can have negative effects in the body, negative effects in the brain, the anecdotal evidence from long-term use, long-term prolonged use, and so many people using it, and so much medical use of this compound over a long ass period of time that, this is it's pretty safe. It's, ever doing bodybuilding, ever using steroids is always going to be a risk. It's always going to be a risk. You're always taking a risk with your body, even with your life. But I don't consider Deca to be a high risk compound, and it calms bodybuilders down. A lot of bodybuilders have problems with too much energy, too much anxiety, too much aggression, and Deca calms people down. A lot of big ass bodybuilders are not really aggressive guys. They're kind of like sedated and laid back, and Deca has something to do with that. Harley asks, hey man, maybe a question. I've been on test on and off for 3 years. I have a girl I'm really into and have been seeing for a while, but I keep having erectile dysfunction. I tried lowering my testosterone from 1,000 milligrams a week to 600 to see if it helped. Also tried HCG, both big and small doses. Also tried Clomid. Not quite sure what to try next. Lower the test more, come all the way off? Or is there something I can do to get my mojo back? All right, so, you just said you've been on and off test for 3 years using doses like 1,000 milligrams per week, 600 milligrams per week, and having erectile dysfunction. You've used HCG and Clomid, didn't work. So I'm going to have to know like how the estrogen is affecting you and like what your estrogen levels are at that point. Because estrogen is essential for male sexual function. If you have no estrogen, your dick will not work. But then for some guys, high estrogen also, the dick won't work. So the key here really is balance with the estrogen. And so with somebody with libido problems, I'm definitely going to have to try to balance their estrogen, help them balance their estrogen. And like talking about the things we were talking about before, like skin issues, nipple issues, prostate issues, and how to use AI precisely and effectively like that. I would look also at your prolactin levels. Look at your prolactin levels. Some people get high prolactin from just testosterone alone. Now look at your prolactin levels. You could try some other sex drive stimulants, like something like Masteron or something like Proviron. And yeah, usually HCG has a pretty large effect on libido. So I don't know what you consider to be big doses, but 1,000 IUs every other day for a month, maybe you'd see a change from that. A lot of guys do. Another thing to keep in mind, though, with bodybuilders and erectile dysfunction is that the sympathetic nervous system has an increased tone in steroid users, okay? So the fight or flight nervous system is more activated and its tone is increased in bodybuilders. So when you are in a fight or flight situation, your dick goes inside. It retracts. It retracts, it's not hanging out because it's trying to protect itself. It doesn't make sense when you're in a fight or running for your life or something like that for your dick to be relaxed and hanging out. Okay, so this sympathetic nervous system stimulation like this has an effect on someone's dick. And so if this gets extreme, which it can in bodybuilders, especially bodybuilders who are using over long periods of time. You said you've been using for 3 years. That's considered a long period of time. The sympathetic nervous system can become overly activated. And so bodybuilders definitely complain about side effects like, hearing someone shut their garbage can door really hard or something, and, like being kind of freaked out for a second and like jumping and looking over there, or like a car backfiring and being like, shit, and like your head like flips to that direction or something. We're also just like elevated anxiety, social anxiety, general anxiety. These are things that are pretty common in long-term bodybuilders, long-term steroid users. And they definitely have a negative effect on your dick. So, like 200 milligrams testosterone per week and cruising for a long time, if that is an issue, like 6 months, can be a way to resolve that problem and then start back up again and make sure that you stay feeling relaxed. And if you start ramping up the dose and you start noticing the sympathetic nervous system effects coming on again. Another one is elevated resting heart rate. A lot of bodybuilders have elevated resting heart rates. They'll be resting, they'll be waking up in the morning, their heart rate will be beating 80 beats, 90 beats, 110 beats per minute, which is not normal. That's from enhanced sympathetic nervous system stimulation. You're constantly wired, you're constantly ready to go, you're constantly ready to jump into action. So for your case, you've done some stuff to try to help yourself. But I have to go into this kind of deeper, more like long-term bodybuilding stuff and the stuff that can happen, because this is a real thing. It's a real thing, and it's not always as simple as adding this med, taking this med out. Or changing the doses. Sometimes you'll actually have to put in hard work to fix yourself. Okay, next question. Ty asks, hey Dan, love the podcast and the book, Ultimate Guide to Roids, 109-page ebook by Dan the Bodybuilder from Thailand. Question for you. I started taking 50 milligrams Anadrol daily with a gram of testosterone, which is a cycle I've done before. Only after a couple weeks, I would get a sudden onset of flushing in my face, which was hot, red, and made me feel like shit. This would happen a couple times a day, about the same time every day. Is this an expression of liver stress or unrelated? The rash is similar to when I drink alcohol, but slightly more intense. Thanks. Always look forward to listening to more of the show. Yeah, that can be a sign of liver stress. Especially the timing of when you feel that sensation. My friend one time, he was taking D-balls, okay? So he would have his D-ball tablets sometimes with him, like pre-workout or at the gym or something. And one time I was eating a pre-workout meal and he gave me 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams of D-ball. And I took that with my pre-workout meal. I wasn't on a D-ball cycle or anything, It was just something dumb, just take that or whatever. But I forget what it was. for at the time. I forget why this was happening, but I had some kind of liver stress for some reason. It wasn't extreme or anything like that, but I'd probably been using some other oral steroids recently and then just been on a break or something. I can't remember specifically, but I was a little bit toxic still. And when I took that 10 milligrams D-ball, within 45 minutes, yes, my face started flushing and I felt dead tired, man, dead tired. And that was because of my liver metabolizing that hormone and it causing stress to my system. And that's not fun. When that happens, it makes you think, man, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to take that again. And I sure as hell didn't take any more 10 milligram D-ball tabs from my friend after that, because I didn't want to feel like that during a workout again. It kind of screwed up my workout actually, because just like you said, the flushing, the hot feeling in the face, and then the tiredness, lack of energy that does not respond to caffeine. So yes, that can be a symptom or an expression of liver toxicity from steroids. Sometimes just taking even a week break from oral steroids can help things not be as bad. Like I said, N-acetylcysteine and Deca can really help. But glutathione injections can solve oral toxicity fast. Because normally if you get toxicity and then you start being okay, well, I'm gonna wait for it to go away, you'll pretty much feel like shit for about a week. It takes about a week once you get oral toxicity for your body to completely filter that out and to kind of feel normal again. But with the glutathione injections, 400 or 600 milligrams and doing that every day for 3 or 4 days, the toxicity is probably going to be pretty much gone by day 3 or day 4. It's pretty strong stuff. And that's no guarantee there. That's no guarantee, but that's been my experience. With the thing about the glutathione helping the toxicity real quick like that. That's been my experience. Caleb asks, what's your stance on human growth hormone, 5 days on, 2 days off versus 7 days straight? Would be looking at 4 to 5 IU per day for injury rehab and conditioning. We'll be running with a base of Test E 300 milligrams per week and some Anavar 40 milligrams a day. Yeah, it's good that you're taking a steroid cycle when you're using the growth hormone, because if you use the growth hormone without a steroid cycle, it has no performance enhancing effects. So you're taking 300 Test, 40 Anavar, that's good. When you're on growth hormone, it's good to be taking the strongest cycle you can, to be honest, because it makes everything else work better. It's like a supercharger to everything else you're using. Using it 5 days on, 2 days off, I can see that. There's methods like taking your whole weekly dose, say someone was using it 7 days per week, and they were then okay, well, I'm just going to take doses when I train. And let's say they're training 4 days per week. So they could say okay, well, I was going to take 5 IUs per day, 7 days a week. So that's 35 IUs of growth hormone per week. You can be well, I'm just going to condense that dosage into my 4 workout days. So I'm going to take 35 IUs, my weekly dosage of growth hormone, but I'm only going to take it on my workout days. So it's going to be 35 IUs split between 4 workout days. So 4 shots per week. And that can be a method in order to get a bolus dose and a really high growth hormone and IGF-1 levels right close to the workout in the anabolic window and get a big growth response from that. That's like a bulking technique. But however, on the other hand, the fat loss properties of growth hormone are the most potent when you take a lot of shots. If you take 2 shots a day, that pretty much does it. That pretty much does the effect. But if you want to get technical, once per 2 hours or once per 3 hours would be absolutely optimizing the rate of how often you can take growth hormone and then the amount of fat that you could burn from taking it. So that's like some info on taking it less frequently versus taking it more frequently. And, another thing is that if you're on 5 days on, 2 days off, you're still going to be like you're on growth hormone. You're still going to look like you're on growth hormone. You're still going to feel like you're on growth hormone, but you're going to save money for 2 days. So that's what I think the most with that, 5 days on, 2 days off is it's a good way to save money. But I think most bodybuilders want to take growth hormone every day. You may have people talking about different methods of using it and stuff, but look, a lot of bodybuilders like to take growth hormone every day, okay? A lot of people also like to take steroids every day, okay? So there's preferences, there's personal preferences, there's other considerations, like we said, like fat loss or bolus doses to try and help muscle growth, hyperplasia, etc. Or small doses very frequently, or taking days off. As long as you get the growth hormone into your body, it pretty much does its thing. But I never did 5 days on, 2 days off, taking growth hormone. I used growth hormone every day. The two protocols that I have usually used with growth hormone is either waking up and first thing in the morning, taking it before eating, and then going and doing a little cardio. That's like classic. And like if I'd be using a low dose, usually I just kind of keep it to that one shot per day. Like if I was using like 3 IUs or 2 IUs, I would just keep it to that one shot per day when I woke up. But whenever I've gone higher, 4 IUs, 6 IUs, 8 IUs, 11 IUs, 15 IUs, whatever, always switched to twice per day shots. And, there could even be another couple shots in there. Bodybuilders they're trying to optimize everything in order to get their muscles bigger. And their whole life revolves around this. And that's just what I'm trying to say, is that you may hear stuff on the internet about like things that people are saying, suggestion, maybe you can do this or something. But it's also pretty like pertinent to say to them, okay, yeah, but what do you do, bro? What do you do? Or what have you done for most of the time? What did you do to get your size? What were you doing 5 years ago? Something like that, because sometimes guys are maybe talking about this stuff 5 days on, 2 days off, but who knows if they're even doing it themselves. Like I said, bodybuilders want to take this stuff. They want to take this stuff. Bodybuilders don't not want to take steroids. They don't not want to take growth hormone, okay? They want to take it. They want to take a lot. All right, next question from Alex. What's your opinion on this lean bulk trend? If you want to gain some size, you need to eat a fuck ton. Give me an example of an IFBB pro bodybuilder that hasn't had an off season where they have blown up and ate about 7,000 calories a day to build decent muscle tissue. Okay, so it's definitely good to lean bulk. Everybody's going to desire to put on muscle mass without putting on fat. And there are things that facilitate that, such as Trenbolone, Superdrol, growth hormone. Those are big ones. Those are big ones that really affect nutrient partitioning, and help you to be able to gain weight without putting fat weight on. But you say lean bulk trend, like maybe guys are talking about being 8% body fat and putting on 15 pounds of muscle or something. And, that's going to be very hard for that to happen. So I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again right now. The formula for building muscle is very cut and dry, okay? The formula is that you need to be taking steroids and you need to be eating in a way that makes your body weight go up. The body weight on the scale has to go up. And at the same time, your lifts at the gym, the numbers have to be going up. You have to have chosen lifts that you're working on, and you're working at getting better at these lifts, okay? So we can just say bench press for an example. This is just a fucking example. Don't get too stuck on, you don't bench press. Okay, so bench press. If right now you're doing 225 for 10 reps, well, doing more would be 225 for 3 sets of 10 reps. Now you've increased your gym performance. You're doing higher workload with this same amount of load, okay? Another way would be getting stronger. So that would be like bench pressing 315 for 10 reps now instead of 225 for 10 reps. You will be bigger benching 315 for 10 reps than you will be benching 225 for 10 reps. When you've made the progress to gain that strength and you're now bench pressing 315 for 10 reps, you will be bigger than you were when you were bench pressing 225 for 10 reps. And then the other thing is adding more reps. So you've got to either add more sets, you got to add more reps, or you got to get stronger. You got to be having your body weight going up. And you got to be, of course, having steroids on there, or else this process is going to be limited to not much. Because what's going to happen is that there's going to be a point where your lifting numbers plateau. And maybe you can even still gain weight, but the lifting numbers stop going up. And provided you know about training theory and how to make gains, progressive overload, how this works, you have been in the gym and you already know that you know how to build your strength up. You know how to build your sets with a certain resistance up and make gym progress. Then you're going to have to increase the dose of steroids, because a lot of people that are on steroids for a long time are way past their genetic strength limits, way past the limits of what they could do, the amount of workload that they could do in the gym. They are only able to do that. They're only able to lift those weights, and they're only able to do those workloads because of the anabolics that they're using. So, the lean bulk trend, it is good to lean bulk, okay? It's good to gain muscle without fat. But whenever you're talking about any of this stuff, you just have to go back to the fundamentals, man, because this is not a complex process of what creates muscle. If you're wondering in what creates muscle, and you're like, well, is it going and getting and feeling a good pump? No, that's totally subjective. Like, that can be associated, or that can be part of gaining muscle. But when you go into the gym, your goal is not to get a good pump. Your goal is to make gym progress, to be better in the gym than you were before. You have to get better. You have to get better at weightlifting. You have to be a more advanced weightlifter. Beginner weightlifters bench press 135, 60 kilograms for a few reps, okay? And they are not big. Bigger guys bench press 2 plates for a few reps, okay? And they are bigger than the guys that are doing 135. And then the guys that are doing 315, benching 315, they are bigger than the guys that are doing 225, okay? And there can be exceptions to this rule. There can be exceptions to this rule where you'd be like, okay, well, it's not that way with this guy. And yeah, that's true. But for that guy in particular, he will always be more muscular when he is a higher strength level than when he is a lower strength level. So for you, if you're benching 135 and you move up to 225 for the same amount of reps, you will be bigger than you were before, okay? And that's guaranteed. So that's the way that you can guarantee. You got to be able to make quantitative progress. Quantitative progress, numbers. My numbers in the gym are going up over time, and I'm getting better at weightlifting. That is the key of how muscle tissue is built. These things like pump and whatever other fucking things they're telling you to do, feeling it, concentrating your mind in the muscle, those are all good things to do, but those are not what is building the muscle, okay? You have to stay with the fundamentals. You have to stay with the basics.
All right. So that's going to be the last question for the podcast today. It was fun talking to you guys. And
I'll be coming up with another episode for you guys real soon here. So make sure to go pick up
Ultimate Guide to Roids, 109-page ebook by Dan the Bodybuilder from Thailand. You know, if you just go to bodybuilderinthailand.com, it's I think it's the first article on the homepage where you can check it out and read like 20 pages. It's definitely worth it. It's my best content. You know, if you like the podcast, the book will blow you away.